Welcome. I'm Rob Wolcott, co-founder and chair of the World Innovation Network, or Twin Global, and adjunct professor of innovation at Chicago Booth School of Business. Everywhere I go in the world, I'm on the lookout for great leadership. So I'm so excited to be here today at Selfridges Group's flagship store in London to interview Ann Pitcher, the managing director of the group. Ann is truly an icon of the global retail space, her organization having been selected as the world's best department store 4 times in a 12-year period. As I was preparing for this conversation, a number of her staff members and colleagues used words that usually don't go together to describe Ann's unique style of leadership. Words like strategic and forensic, or performance and meaning, accessible and formidable. I can't wait to go upstairs to Selfridges' iconic restaurant for this conversation. I hope you'll join us. Ann Pitcher, it's so great to be with you here at the flagship store of Selfridges.
Good morning, thank you.
So Ann, you've spent, it's safe to say, an entire career thus far in retail. And when I say entire career, you started right in high school in United States terms with an internship at another major retailer here in the UK. Tell us a little bit about how you felt those first few days of that internship.
God, taking the clock back. I never really knew what I wanted to do when I left school, as I think so many kids have that same challenge.
So many adults like me, too.
And I elected to join a training program as I left school. When I first went into that store, it was my absolute ambition to be a fashion buyer. I was probably a very confident young lady at the time, clear on what the future would hold. I was going to be a fashion buyer.
Wait, so just for context, I think you were 16 years old when you took this?
Yeah, I was 17.
17?
Yeah, 17 years old.
And at 17 years old, you said, you know what, I'm going to be a fashion buyer.
Yeah, I was either going to be a French teacher or a fashin buyer.
Mon Dieu.
I'd probably still do both today. But fashion buying kind of took the lead. And so it was my first thing I said was I want to be a fashion buyer. And that's great, but here you start work on the shop floor, which is the greatest gift anyone ever gave me. When I say shop floor, actually, my first assignment was in the customer service department in wine queries in the 6-week run-up to Christmas.
What's a wine query?
Where is my wine order and why hasn't it been delivered? A fine start, you might say. And interestingly enough, one which we still challenged by today. Where are my orders? Why haven't they been delivered? You know, in retail, after all of these years, lots has changed, but some things have never changed. So I started my life in customer services on the shop floor, actually in the sub-basement at the time. And I thought, why am I here when I want to be a fashion buyer? And they said, you need to know how the whole thing works.
So you started in the sub-basement and you've worked your way up floor by floor since
nice
then.
Nice analogy, yeah.
Great.
Yes.
Well, we'll certainly come back to this journey because there's a lot we all have to learn from the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of your experience. But I want to now cast to the future. I was so excited to be part of Selfridges' Mapping the Future program that you put on here a couple of months ago. You and your staff designed an extraordinary experience. And it wasn't just about the future of merchandising or details of retail, which is very important, but it was really about the future writ large. So what is one thing that you believe that retailers, perhaps brands, get wrong when they think about the future?
It would be too much for me to say what people get wrong, but I think what we tried to do with the Festival of Future Thinking was provide a space for people to consider the challenges that lie ahead. And we have all, I think, particularly in recent years, been so challenged by everything that the world has thrown at us. Without the knowledge of how to deal with those things, that we have been really engaged in the what here, what now, what do we do? And I think it's really important that we consider kind of, I think, maybe to use some of your words, the contours of change and how they will mean that we have to redefine what we do today. I think we are so operationally challenged right now that finding the bandwidth to think about 5, 10 or maybe 20 years into the future is really difficult. So we use the Festival of Modern Thinking to invite people across the organisation, not just the leaders, but from within, right within the body of the organisation, to consider what the challenges would be and how we might think about them.
Sure, and I recall at the event you had leaders from across Selfridges Group, from Holland and Ireland, obviously the UK, Canada. They came together for 2.5 days here in London, and it really was a broad and deep view. It was artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, metaverse, etc. What's something that struck you that perhaps a conversation or an action that's ensued since that event?
Well, the first thing that struck me about the event was we brought near 200 people together that didn't know one another, and the ability for people to meet colleagues, like-minded colleagues, across the countries within which we operate was huge. They really enjoyed that. They were all surprised that they didn't have to come up with a work plan with KPIs and measures as a result, and they were all quite confused about that because that's what we always do. But I think it was the power of collective thinking that was the most exciting part of that festival. And as we consider how people have kept in touch post that point in time, right, I think that's been a great gift. And I've seen across the organisation how we're talking with one another in a far more regular way than we have ever done in the past.
Well, one of the things that was brilliant about it, particularly at this moment in history, is coming out of pandemic lockdowns like we did all around the world. And colleagues in a company might know each other on a screen, but there still is that visceral experience of being together. And remaining in touch, as you said, and having that connection. Once you build an in-person relationship, it builds trust. And then I'm able to have a conversation with someone in Canada or someone in another part of the business that I've met before, but we have objectives together, and that level of trust enhances my ability to do new things, to try new things.
That's true, and I think there's two things really. For the last 2 or 3 years, we have been connected digitally. This was a physical experience, and we talk a lot, and we will talk a lot, and we'll all continue to talk about the difference between the physical and the digital, and the power of the physical was tangible, and so I think that was another learning. You can't just continue in the way that we've been operating for the last few years. People need to do both.
Well, and the power of physical, let's follow that line for a second. How does the power of physical relate to retail, to the retail experience?
The power of the physical is what we do, and what we do brilliantly. And I think we should never forget how much humans need to be together and experience things together and enjoy. And the role of the department store has always been central to that need, whether it's been the role in the community or the high street. It's what we've always done well. Over recent years, we've had to grapple with going online and all of the other things that we will need to do even better in the future. But the role of the department store has been the physical experience, a true living space for people to enjoy, a joyful, energetic, fun space. And I think, that's what we concentrate so much of our time on here at Selfridges.
Well, you also said, and one of the things I love about your presentations, whether that was at Mapping the Future or you did a session for Women's Wear Daily and a few other things that I reviewed, is you're very good at lists. You're very good at giving the 4 things I'm going to discuss today. And I remember one of the things you mentioned is we need to make retail a vital part of people's lives. What does that mean? What do you mean? How do we do that?
I think we need to listen to what's happening in the world, and we need to not be afraid to embrace the many challenges that we all face. And we need to bring those to life in a way that people can experience them.
Bring the challenges to life.
Bring the challenges to life.
Give me an example of that.
Well, I think, to use a more topical word, we think about allyship here. And we aren't afraid to embrace diversity in every measure. And some of the most exciting things we've done have been quite surprising, I think. So whether it was our agenda campaign when we celebrated diversity, but back in 2017, we were talking about, the diversity of gender and bringing that to life. I think more recently, some of the work we've done to look to the future and embrace some of the ideas about, well, more recently, super futures this year. We've talked with our customers about 3D printing and some of the things that are happening generally in our communities. We're not afraid to embrace that thinking. And we don't just rely on a selection of brands to tell people what to wear, but as an organisation we have a conversation about things that we think matter most to our customers and to the people that work here.
So tell me how that dynamic works. That's a very interesting thing I haven't seen in many places, which is, let's think about the issues that matter to the people who shop with Selfridges or work with Selfridges, and then translate that into what we should be offering and how we should be offering it. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, you are. I mean, let's take something which I am very proud of. A while ago, London was closing down some of its skate parks, and we thought for our young customers that they needed to skate. So we dedicated a space in our building as a skate park, and we welcomed 50,000 skaters in a month. So we took the decision to build a permanent skate park in the store. The skaters from that original temporary space came back in and they skate with us today, and some of them still teach our customers to skate today.
Teach skating.
Teach skating. So we have a full skate bowl here where we skate every day.
And they're doing it as volunteers because they love
Selfridges, and they shop here, they skate here. But they started years ago in the old hotel in a temporary skate park. So I think it's just talking to what people care about and bringing it to life for them. I think that early conversation, we were probably groundbreaking in our agenda campaign, where we put men's and women's clothing together in one space and we celebrated diversity. Today, that feels like a very important thing that everybody should start to do. And we indeed have accelerated all of our efforts around diversity, equity and inclusion, but with an authenticity that started really way back. And I think, again, this authenticity and trust is something that we have always worked very hard on bringing to life for our customers. So whatever we do, I think it has deep meaning. We celebrate right back in our history, years ago, in terms of allyship and talking to things that people care about. Gordon Selfridge himself was a real pioneer, and he was a real. He really cared about the suffragette movement. So Selfridges was the first store to put women's toilets in the building. And so the suffragettes and women who shopped here could actually go to the loo here without having to go home.
Well,
pioneering, but entirely necessary.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Selfridge was an American who came to the UK.
How important that you should celebrate that, Rob.
Yes, well, I'd just like to underscore
correct.
that. We sometimes do come back to the empire here and there.
And of course, today we welcome the world here.
Absolutely.
But in terms of using that word welcome, everybody is welcome. But that just doesn't mean everybody. That means the most diverse set of communities that we can possibly appeal to. And to make them feel welcome is hard work.
Well, it's one thing for an organization to have a visionary founder who did things like you just described, but also we're right now in the space that is typically the restaurant. It's been cleared out a bit for us to have this conversation, but this is the restaurant, and I believe your founder was the first to put a restaurant into a department store here in the UK. So there were a whole range of things that he pioneered many years ago. But it's another thing for an organization 100+ years later to still have this sense of vision and to be a pioneer, to continue to be a pioneer. But I'd also point out that what you did with that skate park, if you and your colleagues were sitting around talking about what your consumers are going to want in terms of colors and styles in the next season, you would never have come up with that concept.
I mean, that is not enough anymore, just to tell people what to wear. I think it was back in 2004 when we decided to launch Project Ocean, which is where we had a conversation with our customers and we withdrew, or we focused on only selling sustainably sourced fish. Our sustainability campaigns, for which today I think we are well known and respected, started back in 2004. So I think as a business, I use our history as a demonstration of the fact that we come from a position of authenticity with the desire to build trust with our customers for what we do. And I think there are too many businesses that have been around for hundreds of years and might not be around much longer. But I think what is important in the customer's mind is that we deliver that authenticity. And so, whatever we're talking about now, the question about authenticity and sustainability is very, very important right now. But we've been focused on that for many years, and I think people see that.
Well, this is one thing that I point out to business leaders all over the world. And almost every business that exists today, there were some founders who had some vision. Otherwise, they would never have created something new. And so in almost every business, there's that heritage somewhere. You've just been able to somehow leverage it a lot better here at Selfridges. So it's something we can all learn. So also at Mapping the Future, you talked about collectives. I was excited about that concept because I'm seeing that in other spaces like technology, venture investing. It's percolating in very new ways now, and I don't think we really understand how important that trend is. Tell us about the role you see for collectives going forward in your space.
I mean, I think this is hugely important. Basically, I'd be so bold as to say old-fashioned dictatorial hierarchical structures are definitely dead. And if you don't know that, then you need to sit up and have another look. I think that when we look at what is happening, and the industries that you refer to are actually the disruptors of our world, particularly, of course, the technologists.
Sure.
And also huge corporations with an enormous history that find it difficult to face into the future are going to fail unless they listen. And when we talk about collectives in its highest possible level, it will be only through collective thinking that we fix the challenges of climate change and the planet. If we boil that down to what happens within our business, it'll be only if we listen to our customers and our teams that we solve the problems of the future. And as an executive and within a boardroom, a few people cannot now understand how to do everything. That maybe worked 20 years ago. But today, everything that happens in here is built by the magic makers that sit within. We've got magic makers, we have a Ministry of Fun, we have retail scientists here who know far more than what happens at the top of the tree.
Now, wait a minute, and you can't throw out magic makers and Ministry of Fun without explaining what that is and how it works. What are the results of having that kind of a fun aspect to this company?
I mean, I think it is, the last few years particularly. First there was a pandemic, then there was George Floyd, then there's war, then there's famine, mass migration. How can we possibly consider how these things can affect how can we possibly work that out as a small team of leaders in a boardroom? And yet, the lives and souls and spirits of our people and our customers are affected by that every day. We have to listen to them and allow them the time to work it out and tell us what to do. And part of the reason, and that's a big challenge for any leadership and for any organisation, but essentially the formula, I think, is to provide the space for those teams to talk. Hence, the Festival of the Future that we held the other day. And I think what we have huge, huge challenges that governments and legislation can't resolve. And we have huge disruptions through the whole technology industry and the disruptors we've talked about. Somebody needs to navigate the future. So finding those navigators within your organisation who can navigate the problems ahead, but bring them to life in a way that is fun and people can enjoy, is what I'm talking about. And so we have magic makers and navigators.
In addition to an example like Mapping the Future, the conference you did here a couple of months ago, what's something else you do to identify those magic makers and bring them together in a collective manner?
Well, I think one of the things we have done recently, particularly back in 2020 when nobody could actually physically get together, and it was useful that we had all the tools in place to allow people across, the Netherlands, Ireland, Canada and the UK to talk, was we actually created a group of Imagineers. And we had about 60 kids who were basically supported in terms of how they held their conversations.
When you say kids,
Well, I call them the kids because I'm so old, but I mean, from within our organisation, not just the leaders, from within, across the organisation, all levels, if you will, but a group of very diverse thinkers. And we called them the Imagineers, and we let them imagine what we thought were the problems, the challenges of the future. And they came up with some of the obvious things, like, what are we going to do about the metaverse? By the way, that's a whole other conversation. What do we think the issues around diversity, equality are going to be, and how we're going to embrace them? Do we have enough money to build, our physical stores and our websites and our digital experiences? And they came up with 6 or 7 things, which they then presented back to the executives across all 4 businesses. And then we sort of took a little bit of a halt and we looked at that. And we actually built those questions that they asked into our business plans and into our thinking, because they came up, surprisingly, with all the right questions and a few extra. And those actually were the foundation of the festival that we held the other day. So for a few years now, we've been inviting teams of people to do that. And I think it's been particularly helpful as we embrace some of the things that we didn't really know how to do. So 2 years ago, we set up a diversity board in each of our organisations. And those boards today have achieved so much. I'm kind of on the verge of tears when I say the pride with which diversity, equity and inclusion now is embedded within our organisation. We have communities really, preaching the word, but more importantly than that, through that work that they themselves have done, this organisation has publicly declared its objectives around women in leadership. So 50% of our leaders by 2025 will be women. We will eliminate the gender pay gap by 2025. We would never have done those things without the confidence of our teams telling us that that's what we needed to do. So I think, there's a lot that comes from within your organisation that as a leader you might not see or understand, or sometimes be brave enough to embrace. And I think using your teams to give you that confidence is really helpful.
Well, speaking of being brave enough to embrace, and whether it was bringing people together to ask the right questions or enhancing DEI as a priority for Selfridges, I can say that a number of the people I talked to before our interview, 3 of them in fact, said, you know what, I'm here because of Anne. I joined Selfridges, I stayed with Selfridges. There's a sense of affinity, there's a sense of belief, and probably because you and your colleagues have been able to embrace these challenging concepts and turn them into action. People see that.
You spoke to the right people, Robert.
Yeah, well, maybe you selected them. I don't know. No, definitely not. I was ferreting around at the event, talking to various people. Yeah, actually accosting them in the cocktail hour to ask them, what are you doing here?
Best time ever.
It was great, by the way. Okay, it's 5 years from now. And we'll talk a little bit about your transition to new grounds in Canada, for instance. But it's 5 years from now. What's one thing you wish for Selfridges Group? One thing you wish for the future of retail?
One thing I wish for the group is that we continue to celebrate the power of the collective. And what a fantastic opportunity. What I would like to see is to work harder to create a real partnership with our partners. And that's not just our partners for our products and services, but the other partners, our creative partners, our artistic partners, our all of the people that we work with, the culture makers, let's say, how we bring the culture makers together across the entire group and celebrate the kind of things that we've discussed. The power of collective thinking across the scale of this business can be extraordinary. And as I say, it's like any family, we're all at different levels, we're all at different moments in our lives. Some of us have got the MBA and are working, some of us are still in kindergarten. And that's okay, I think. Not everybody can do everything at the same time. But as we look at the scale of this organisation going forward, we must learn from one another, and that must be the power of the collective. And all of the partners we have should see us as an organisation that they can work with and through to achieve their goals.
Great. What about 5 years from now, retail writ large, retail in general? What do you wish for this space?
I mean, I would say retail at large and in general needs to reinvent itself, no less a word. I think the current model is broken. And that's exciting for me rather than soul destroying. I think if we look to the future with confidence, we can find the formula. I think that there will be a very distinct change as we see how the existing retailers embrace really how they're going to work across all the various platforms and live the lives that their customers live. So when we talk about, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we had to add on a website. Today, we have to be completely part of our customers' lives in every measure. And unless you can do that, then I think failure is nigh. So that'll be the big question. Department stores themselves have always been fabulous places. And I think as long as we can think about what that word fabulous means, then there will be a future for us.
I remember in my own hometown, Chicago, Illinois, we live outside New York City now, but my old hometown, we always had Marshall Field's, which was acquired by Macy's a number of years ago. Great institution, Macy's, but people had this emotional connection to Marshall Field's, and the building still has the plaque on State Street, and that emotional connection isn't there. But contrast that to when I came back from the session a couple months ago at Selfridges, and I told a neighbor of mine living in New Jersey outside New York City, and he's not a shopper. He's sort of the antithesis of a shopper, but boy, does he love cars. He's a Porsche collector. And when I mentioned Selfridges, he lit up and he said, let me show you some pictures. And he went to his phone and he was able to pull up pictures of, I guess you had a couple of Porsches here not too long ago that had been intentionally damaged, I guess, by an artist. And when he came to London, he discovered this and he said to his wife, Laura, we've got to go to Selfridges. And she said, you want to go to Selfridges? She said, I got to go see that car. So he was sucked in. She bought some things. So your ploy worked. But but having that kind of a position is really, really complex and exciting thing.
I mean, that was a collaboration with Daniel Arsham, which was hugely well received. He also customized a can of baked beans, by the way. So Porsche to baked beans was cool. I think that the fallback for many retailers is we simply don't have the money. And I often hear, Anne, you've been lucky that you've had the money to invest within this organisation. But actually, it's not always the money. And even if we think about our relationship with our creatives and our friends across the creative world, one of the things we actually did was we had some empty space, and we set up a space called Picton Studios, and we invited creatives to come in and just use the space, which is a challenge for so many people. But by using the space and working so closely to us, we became friends, and they're still collaborators with us today. Wow. So I think we need to be a little more generous in what we do. Not everything needs to cost money. Those creators whom we became friends with years ago are still our friends today. And some of the collaborations that we've created for our customers with those creatives has been wonderful. A simple exercise in what doesn't really cost any money is when a while ago we became very concerned about the amount of big brand noise. We hosted a campaign called No Noise, and we took 20 iconic products that we felt didn't need any branding on at all, and we took the branding off, including, by the way, our own carrier bag. And we were able to celebrate that these products were so iconic that they didn't need any branding on them whatsoever. It was a fantastic campaign. It cost very little. It took some persuading some of our suppliers to take any labelling off.
So even your suppliers took the labelling off their own products?
Especially our suppliers. And when you look back at who they were, some of the industry's greats took their labelling off a product. And it was so clear that customers knew what it was without any labelling. But that created a conversation that talked to the amount of branding that was out there and took it all away and actually focused on what we actually use. And it was very exciting.
So deconstructing the notion of brands and the product and our experience and stirring things up. It's sounding like if Selfridges isn't a platform for creativity and for creatives, then it's just a place to buy stuff.
I don't think that's very fair. I'm going to push back on that one. I think Selfridges is a place to have in your heart. People say I love Selfridges, but I don't really know exactly why. Every time I come here, something's different, and it is.
But that's the percolating creativity that's here, that your team has, that your partners have, that the creatives that just have built an affinity for being with Selfridges and seeing it as a platform for open expression.
I hope
draws that in.
I hope so. A place of constant change. And as we look forward into what is undeniably going to be a very difficult few years ahead, it will be newness and excitement that invites people to enjoy Selfridges. And we are well positioned. And by the way, we've got some great ideas ahead. So newness and excitement. But this place is just joyful. It can be pouring with rain outside. It can be dark, miserable skies, as you just found out in your trip to London, Robert. But actually, when you walk in here, the music's blaring, the lights are on. There's always something to see, and particularly this Christmas. So, you know, we have to remember. If you ask about what retail will look like in the future, it has to be a joyful, living place, and it can be joyful and living on every level.
Well, that's a brilliant vision for the future, not just of Selfridges, but also for retail. If you had one magic wish for Selfridges Group, what would that be?
For the Selfridges Group, I think the power of the collective and the commitment and the partnerships with our friends across all of the creative industries is what brings this business to life.
Great. All right, I want to shift gears. You've had a storied career, and that's not an exaggeration. Think of someone who was a mentor to you in your career. Who was that person, and how did they help change you?
I think it's always a hard question, but I think for the last kind of 20 years of my life, it's definitely Galen Weston. I think when I came here, I had this really brilliant idea for a new space and a new category of products that I thought we should embrace. And I prepared an amazing plan. I mean, it was foolproof, let me tell you. And I presented it.
You had a foolproof
I had
plan.
a foolproof, amazing plan.
I'm suspecting that there is a caveat here coming.
And I presented it with happiness and joy, and he said, it's great, but it's not quite great enough. So I was flattened. And I went away with my team, and I said, well, I don't know what more you've got to do. And I thought, but I'm going to do it. And we went back 6 months later with another plan, and he said, how much better do you think that is than the last one you showed me? And I said, it's a lot better. And he said, what more do you think you can do with it? And I kind of said, damn. And I went away. And guess what? Third time lucky, today we have the Wonder Room.
Great, the Wonder Room.
The Wonder Room. But interestingly, when we came back with our third time lucky plan for a watches and jewellery department, he said, that's great. What are you going to call it? And I said, what do you mean, what am I going to call it? We're going to call it the Watches and Jewellery Room. He said, who's going to come? And so we came up with this vision that Selfridges should always be a destination with many destinations therein. So wherever you wake up in the world, I think that we're famous for the destinations we have. The Wonder Room, the skate park, the cinema, the designer galleries, the studio, the corner shop. These are destinations within their own right. They're a call to action. They're something to celebrate. And I think we've become famous for so many of them. So as a mentor, pretty hard to work for in those early years, but inspiring in every way. And always sought to show us how we can do better.
So his pushback advanced you and your team?
I think it helped me advance personally. In two ways. Always search to see how far you can go and be brave. Test yourself time and time again. For our team, inspiring, of course. And for this business, I think the story is there.
Great. So let's move to another pivot. What is a pivotal moment in your career, and what did you learn from it?
I truly think the pivotal moment in my career was when we committed to Project Ocean. And I found it very hard as a retailer to look at the business we had with a sustainable eye to the future and consider what needed to be done. And on reflection...
And again, Anne, this was in 2004?
This is 2004,
yeah,
when we looked at only sourcing fish from sustainable sources. And when I look at it, of course, that was radical in the extreme at the time. But it was the beginning of a sustainability journey that today is, I think, world leading. And it was very hard to suddenly start. Well, actually, it started before Project Ocean. It started with fur. We took fur out of this organisation back in 2001, 2. And Project Ocean was the next logical step. And it was really the moment when, as a retailer, I began to understand that we can no longer sell things that are endangered or will endanger the planet. And, you know, from fur through to, which was worth many millions of pounds, but it was just obvious our customers didn't want it, or a growing number of younger consumers felt very, very strongly that it was the wrong thing for us to do.
But to be fair to you and your colleagues, and that was certainly true, but in 2004, almost 20 years ago, it wasn't even close to a majority of your customers who were it was kind of on the fringe at that point, and thankfully so. It has risen up around the world, but that was still very early to be in that conversation.
That was probably 2000, 2001 that we removed fur. 2004 was a concentration on fish.
Ocean, yeah.
Next was a focus on precious skins. We were very early to remove those from this business. And why? Because I think what most people forget is that, many people forget, is that we always have to have a lens on a younger consumer and the consumer or the customer of tomorrow. I hate the consumer word.
Yeah, let's talk about that a second. I've always agreed we have in marketing and we have these notions of we target consumers. It's like I'm going to take them out back and shoot them. We have a horrible lingo that we use, and I know you have issues with the notion of consumer. What should we say instead?
Well, you know, we could have a go at people or humans. People have feelings. People have a spirit of their own. And I think consumer just sort of flattens all that out, and then we put them into 6 groups and target them accordingly without really understanding them or listening to them. And so we like to think about people and humans. And, you know, when you start talking about people, you begin to talk to people about the things that matter to them. Consumers are just people you tell things to. I think people are things you share with.
Interesting. So a consumer is, by definition, defined by that which you're trying to get them to consume. So your lens on an individual becomes how are they likely or not likely to buy what I've got to sell. Whereas if I look at them as people, then you find out what matters to them. Then you can determine what experiences or products or...
Correct. I think if you start by trying to sell something, it's probably all over. If you start by appealing to people and showing them how you understand them and their lives, look at the skate park. I mean, we never tried to sell anyone a skateboard. But actually now, those skaters are the lifeblood of our menswear department. By the way, there are a lot of girls in there as well. I think, I think consumers is just taking the spirit out of the whole thing and just intends to be those who you want to buy something. But today, when you come in here, there's so much more you can do before you actually shop.
That's interesting, Anne. You said something like, if you just try and sell somebody something, the game is over.
Yeah, because there's so many people trying to do exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
There's so much stuff in the world. It's all entirely the same.
Well, Anne, as we've had a wonderful conversation so far, and fortunately it's not over, I think we should reference for everyone with us that here we are in London, typically cloudy and rainy as it was when we walked in this morning, and then through the clouds pierced a brilliant tropical sun. So we had to take a moment and redo the set. So if any continuity experts are out there, they'll note that things are a little bit different now for the rest of our conversation. So with this, future of retail, one piece of advice for the leaders in the retail industry.
I think, Rob, you introduced this session by saying that at Selfridges we're strategic in our thinking, but forensic in our analysis. And I think any leader today has to do what I've done here, which is to make it very clear what our vision and purpose is. Our vision here is that we are reinventing retail, and our purpose is that we are reimagining a sustainable future for our customers and our team members. I think that's the strategic ambition. Forensically, we have very clear measures, objectives and KPIs around how we deliver to that vision and purpose, and they are deeply embedded within the rhythm of trading across our organisation. So it is the clarity of the leadership that I think we have managed to set, and the ability for everybody to celebrate how they achieve that through the daily, weekly rhythm of coming to work. That is something that all leaders must consider.
And I think, Anne, something that takes a lot of nuance and work is drawing the connection between the vision and purpose of the organization and the day-to-day decisions that people make. And when you start to show those connections, then people realize, my colleagues made a different decision than I would have expected in this case because of our vision and purpose as a business. I think that's something that has a lot of power for organizations. All right, now let's think about the you a few years ago, aspiring to be that leader of purchasing for a retailer. What advice do you have for young people today aspiring to leadership in their future?
I think, first of all, anybody needs to be clear as to their own purpose today, and that's quite a challenge for a number of people. But to be clear of your own purpose, to find a job that you love, because, to quote the famous Gordon again, there's no fun like work. I've been fortunate that I've always loved what I do. So many people don't like what they do. Change it quick. Life is long and your career is long. And thirdly, I think don't expect everything to happen today. There's a hunger for success very quick, but it takes a long time. And celebrate successes along the way as you build your career is probably the third thing. But I've always enjoyed my life, and I've always been clear as to what I wanted to achieve from that first day I set foot into a shop. So reinventing this business and reinventing myself as I go forward is something I find really exciting.
So do you believe that you had that sense of purpose early on, or is it something that evolved over time?
I probably couldn't articulate it when I started, but I think today building a sustainable future for any business is such a key opportunity for any leader, and helping an organisation understand how to do that is something I feel quite inspired by. I think the sense of how much our teams within this organisation value the understanding that they know why they're here and what they're supposed to do helps everybody get through the week. You know, this is a physically demanding job, working in a shop. The hours are long, the work is hard, but if you know why you're here and what you're here to do, then it really helps, and you can make decisions within a framework. Sounds simple, right?
Simple yet challenging and nuanced, as all the great things are.
Yeah, and I have a great team.
So, Anne, you have some big news that just hit the wires. What's next for Anne Pitcher?
I'm excited to be the Deputy Chair of Holt Renfrew in Canada, which is a business of 7 stores spanning Canada, and a really dynamic, exciting department store retailer.
And the leading luxury retailer in the country.
Thank you.
So welcome back to North America, I guess.
I'm excited. I will be remaining in the UK and travelling frequently, but exciting times ahead.
Well, let us know if you make your way to New York City.
I will be there.
Love to see you. As we conclude, I have one more question for you. And you haven't been prepped for this.
Wow.
What are 3 words that describe how Anne Pitcher feels about the future? Hyphens are acceptable.
I feel excited about the future. I feel open-minded.
Great.
I feel brave and confident. That's 4, sorry, Robert.
4 words. Well, we'll put a hyphen between one of them, be okay. Excited, open-minded, confident. The current model is broken, and that's exciting. Words that could only be spoken by someone who's been in the midst of dramatic change her entire career and aspires to continue to lead through the change coming in the future. Listen to the world. Bring the challenges to people's lives, the challenges that matter. In order to do that as a leader, you'll need a lot of magic makers, a lot of Imagineers along with you for that ride. It's important to know that while the resources you must have courage to assign the resources, the people necessary to do this. Authenticity doesn't have to cost money. Authenticity that should be something that becomes a natural act, based on the vision, based on the purpose of the business you're leading. The leader needs to be brave enough to embrace that challenge and embrace the humanity in each of us, not just the consumer, but the people themselves, to reinvent, to reimagine for people, to build a sustainable future for everyone. Ann Pitcher, thanks so much for all you've brought to the industry, to Selfridges, and to the world.
Thanks, Rob. More to be done.